I work for a railroad and hold the position of assistant diesel locomotive driver. I won't go into the details of the job. I'll just say that my position is the lowest in the train operating environment. My duties include wiping diesel from oil, knocking ice off the running gear, and sipping tea in a cozy cabin. All in all, I'm happy with everything. What to complain to a 20-year-old guy who got a job right after the internship? Only the permanent smell of diesel fuel from his clothes and sleepless nights. One of those nights is what we're going to talk about. It happened about 2 years ago, in the middle of January. I had just started working independently. I was thrown into a large station located in the center of a military town, 15 miles from my city. I was living in a rented apartment. I was not particularly happy with this situation, but on the other hand, the independent life also has its charms, although sometimes there was a longing. And so my 5th shift was approaching. Today I had to work at night. Sitting at my laptop, I looked at my watch. It was 4:02 p.m. I exhaled and thought to myself, here we go. I didn't get any sleep before my shift again. I'll be sluggish and sleepy at night again. Okay, I'll get over it. From watching the show, I was distracted by a phone call. It was Andrei Pavlovich, my machinist. He was a cheerful, bald man in his 60s who knew his job and the locomotive like the back of his hand. I picked up the phone. Hello, Pavlovich. Hello, Dima. Listen, I won't be on shift today. I urgently needed to go to the city. I took the day off. When you come to the depot, go to the supervisor. You'll be combined with another driver for this shift. And then I'll come, and you'll be with me again. His voice was a little different from usual. He was breathing more often than usual, occasionally swallowed saliva, and in general his voice sounded a bit scared, or something like that. Ah, got you. I'll come by. Everything okay in there? You took the day off without warning. You need to leave urgently. I'm fine. My wife asked me to go see her brother. Why are you meddling in other people's business? You're not coming out of the engine room until the diesel's shiny. Haha, okay, but don't hit me. Have a good trip. Andrei Pavlovich hung up without answering anything. I looked at the phone with a disgruntled face and continued watching the show. As time passed, I looked at the weather forecast. Today it's minus 14.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's dense fog. That's great. I packed up and went to work. I went to the supervisor's office and was introduced to the machinist, a tall, dense guy, 26 years old. As it turned out, he just finished his training and got a job with us. Nice to talk to, knows about memes and games. This is it, I thought. After a tedious review of briefings and other paperwork, we moved on to our locomotive. On the way, he told me something that we were working today at a plant producing crushed stone for the railroads. Well, expected. Where to send an inexperienced machinist, but to a single track with cars on the edges. Just go back and forth moving cars around, I thought. It's a good thing Pavlovich left today. Every time we work at the plant, something happens to him. He misses a vigilance check, he speeds. He's not having any luck here. I don't want to have to justify myself to the boss again. After inspecting our diesel locomotive, we went to our railroad track. Everything was going just fine. The train is running. I'm chatting with my colleague and smoking right in the cab. Pavlovich, by the way, didn't allow me to smoke in the cabin. That's how half of the shift went by. At 1:17 a.m., the radio station told our locomotive to go to the technical parking lot. We don't have lunch, not officially, but we are given 2 hours for the so-called inspection and maintenance of the locomotive. We quickly inspect the locomotive and go about our business. We are about halfway there, about 3 miles to the station, and the same amount to the factory. It is comfortable to sleep. No light from the searchlights and the rumble of locomotives and other noises from the plant. Single track and dense woodland on either side. Pulling the brake, the driver sent me off to inspect the running gear of the train while he threw his feet up on the console and watched the news on his phone. What a lazy dick. You could have helped, I thought. and got down from the locomotive. I had a flashlight, a hammer and mittens with me. Wading through the deep snow, I went around the car in a circle. The running gear is fine. We can go back. But the view fascinated me. A milky sea of fog, rails going nowhere, and a lonely diesel locomotive, a majestic monster, a green metal hulk, whose light was drowned in this shroud literally in 10 meters. It was breathtaking. I smoked a cigarette, and feeling that half of the thermos of tea I had drunk was begging to go outside, I decided to go to the toilet. I decided not to go to the restroom near the diesel locomotive. The driver could look in the mirror, and in general it was not aesthetically pleasing. I walked away from the locomotive, toward the landings, lighting the way with a flashlight. I didn't want to fall and break something in the dark. While I went to the bathroom, I noticed some rusty white paint decals in the bushes. Finished, I carefully advanced toward the sign. After walking 30 feet, I pulled the old and rusty sign off a lower tree branch. The number TE3692 was still clearly legible on it. It was a license plate from some diesel locomotive. 3 is a rather old diesel locomotive. A find like this is a rarity for a connoisseur. Holy shit, I'll stick it on the bumper of my car or put it in my room. What a catch. I joyfully looked at the find as suddenly on the right something crunched. I turned sharply, shining my flashlight. The light was drowning in fog, but 50 feet away 2 bright lights were clearly visible. The beast of the forest walks. Its eyes are shining. I hope it's not a wolf. And as I spoke those words, I saw the lights slowly fade and then disappear. The animal didn't turn away and walk away. The eyes didn't recoil as if it had walked backwards. Absolutely silently, the lights disappeared. I felt uneasy. Goosebumps went from top to toe, and I turned around a couple times and lit up the space. No one. Everything was quiet. Even too quiet. Not even the sound of a diesel engine. Either I've gone so far away or the driver has shut it down. My brain must be going crazy from lack of sleep. All right. I gotta get back. It's cold outside. Holding the sign under the arm of my left hand, I hurriedly walked through the moderately deep snow toward the diesel locomotive. It's safe, warm, and bright. The beast wouldn't get in. I didn't want to think about what I had seen. The branches crunched under my feet, but suddenly I heard a different kind of crunch. It sounded like a large bone or someone's spine had broken. Pretty nasty sounding. The crunch sounded from somewhere behind me. Frozen in place, I stood motionless for about 15 seconds, digging a bunch of thoughts in my head and counting the frequent beats of my heart. My feet were getting inordinately cold. They were going numb little by little, either from the cold or from the terror. Then I slowly turned around. The light of the lantern was fading again in the thick fog, and 3 feet away from me there were those lights again. But they were higher now than they had been that time. About the height of my eyes. Now they were moving leisurely, outlining a recumbent figure 8. And there was that crunch again. Now I realized what its source was. The creature was shaking its head and crunching its vertebrae. After 7 seconds of disgusting neck gymnastics, my eye stopped. The cracking of bones stopped, but it was replaced by whispers. About 10 voices spoke at once, male and female, far and near. Even children's voices were heard. They all blended into a disorderly noise. It was impossible to make out what they were saying. It was as if they were getting into my head. In the midst of my own thoughts and a stream of whispers, I was still able to command my body to run. I turned sharply and accelerated. I ran as fast as the mud under my feet and heavy winter overalls allowed me to run. On the move, I maneuvered between trees and jumped over all kinds of holes and ravines. My legs carried me on autopilot, and I was carrying my stuff and the plague. I'm surprised I haven't thrown it away yet. It's not her fault for all this shit, and I'm carrying her with me. I was running without feeling tired, but I began to feel uneasy that the forest seemed longer than it had been before. I felt like I had run about 3,000 feet, and the trees were still there. After a couple more minutes of walking, I ran out into deep snow, and the strip ended. A railroad embankment showed up, and I ran up it like steps, although there was a good incline and gravel. Standing in the middle of the track, I stopped. A faint sense of calm followed. I got out. "Okay, stop. Where's the diesel locomotive?" I grudgingly muttered in a full voice. Looking around, I didn't find my car. Pulling myself together, I assumed that in that landing I had gone sideways, and the locomotive was somewhere further down the track, and because of the fog it was, expectedly, not visible. Well, there was nothing to do, so I went in the direction of the base, the snow crunching under my feet. I was walking fast towards the only goal, to get to my iron fortress. On the way, I began to notice my surroundings. The rails were rusty and the joints were wide. When I stopped, I kicked the snow under me a couple of times and saw that there was an old, rotten wooden sleeper under my feet. Twisting the toe of my work boot, I broke off a piece of frozen, rotten wood. It smelled characteristically of creosote, a substance used to treat wooden sleepers, a classic railroad smell. This isn't the way. Where am I? Looking around, I saw another sign. It was a kilometer post. A white, in places rusty, angular plaque was mounted on the concrete shaft. It showed the numbers 276, and on the other half, after the corner, 275. This was definitely not my way. The path to the base is only 9 miles and runs on reinforced concrete ties, and there are no checkpoints. Looking at the sign and trying to make sense of this crap, I heard a familiar sound. It was the same crunching of my neck vertebrae, but now it was so close behind me that it felt like it was my spine snapping. But it wasn't him. At the same moment, I broke out in a cold sweat, blood pounding in my temples, and I fumbled for the handle of the hammer in the pocket of my orange vest. Grabbing the tool and clutching it, preparing to strike, I turned around. It stood about 3 feet away from me. I couldn't call it a person, but it looked remotely like a woman. A hunched, pale body with twisted limbs, in tattered, dirty rags that looked like a dress. It swiveled its head slowly, wriggling its neck a great deal. A living person could not do that. Its face was gruesome. Torn skin exposed a pierced skull, a scalp with sparse, gray and long hair hanging from a couple inches of skin. The mouth was ripped down to the cheek on one side, showing off brown, rotten, bestial fangs and a psychopathic grin on the other. The eyes were devoid of eyelids and eyebrows. They were completely white and emitted a greenish light. On thin hands without 2 fingers, it held some kind of lump wrapped in an old newspaper. Out of it were visible arms and legs. It was a baby. It was a baby. There was dark, stinking blood dripping from the newspaper. The sight of it made my muscles cramp, and the plate from the locomotive fell out of my armpit and crashed onto the gravel. At the same second, the thing bent its neck down sharply, looking at the sign. When it saw it, it slowly raised its head and smiled nastily at me, letting out a wrenching wheeze. I knew I had to hit her, or she'd eat me. I swung, bringing my arm back and ready to put all my strength into the blow to crack her skull to mush. But someone did it for me. A hand with a hammer appeared behind a creature and juicy fucking hit her temple. The impact went into the brain, making a squelching sound. But the bastard didn't give a shit. She just twitched, turned back, and ran off into the crops, making some kind of wailing noise. If I'd hit her, I'd be dead. Out of the fog, a man stepped toward me. It was an elderly man in an old-style railroad uniform from the 70s. On his head, he wore a blue cap with a shiny emblem of the USR Ministry of Railways. He had a broad, stern face with green eyes and a gorgeous white mustache. Dumbfounded a little, I continued to stand in an attacking posture. Grandfather exhaled, brushed his hammer in the snow, staining it black and brown, and glancing at me said, "Yes, put the hammer down. Don't strain it. And why are you frozen?" His words sounded like an incantation, and I immediately lowered my arm and stood straight in front of him. "Father, where am I?" I said, swallowing saliva. "Are you blind?" You looked at the column for a minute, and you didn't remember the number. He said kindly, but at the same time with a kind of reproach. Yes, I understood that on 276, but on this way there is no such kilometer, and the way is not the same, and I do not know where the locomotive. And what the fuck was that thing in front of me? Grandpa interrupted me. Why are you talking like a machine gun? Do you believe your eyes? It says 276th, so it is. Where else but on the railroad tracks can your locomotive be? On the railroad tracks. Follow that track and you'll find her. What do they teach you? He grinned. What the hell was that thing standing there? You hit it with a hammer. The less you know, the better you sleep. Don't worry about it. Come on, the driver's waiting, he said, and pointed behind me. Okay, we'll figure it out later. Thanks. Take care of yourself, I said, and was about to pick up the sign, but the old man grabbed it first. It's not good to steal. This is mine. And say hello to Andrei. Tell him it's from Igoric, he said, frowning his eyebrows. I made a look like boss, as you wish, turned around, and went in the right direction. After 20 seconds, I heard behind me, don't turn around. It sounded 0.5 miles away from me, even though I had walked about 300 feet. After walking about 1 mile, I noticed that the rails became shiny from takat and lay on iron concrete sleepers. Then I saw a huge square silhouette ahead. It was my diesel locomotive. The rumble of the diesel energized my momentum, and I raced toward my goal. Running into the locomotive, I closed all the outer doors, climbed into the cabin, and sat down, and just fell asleep on my desk. The driver woke me up in the morning. We turned in for the shift and went home. In the smoking room, the old workers were talking about Pavlovich. It was hard on the man. He had been through so much, and they were sending him to this place on the anniversary of the crash. Having finished smoking, I stopped one mechanic and asked him everything I could about it. He told me that before, in the early 60s, there was no way to the plant, as well as the plant itself. There was a railroad between stations, and there was a machinist who had a wife. Poor thing went blind and crazy at the age of 32. She took her baby and went to the track and threw herself in front of a train. That train was being driven by her husband. Ever since then, there's been all kinds of crazy stuff going on at kilometer 276. The traffic lights turn red, then the radio will give out some noise, whispers and children's crying, and in the fog or rain often see some kind of kikimora with burning eyes. The trains used to hit there afterwards. The track collapsed. Then they dismantled the track and laid another one to the factory. The men don't like that place, and all this has something to do with a certain Igoric. I asked, lighting another cigarette. The mechanic looked as if I had learned something I shouldn't have known, lit a cigarette, and reluctantly told me that in 1977 this Igoric was a machinist. His assistant was Andrei Pavlovich. For some unknown reason, half of the crutches on that kilometer were torn out of the sleepers. The train went under the track. The driver died, having sent the assistant driver to the diesel room, and he held the train brake crane to the last and reported by radio. Since then, Pavlovich constantly sees Igoric on the side of the track of the 276th kilometer. They were on a diesel locomotive of the 3rd series with the factory number 692. It turned out that Pavlovich went not to his wife's brother, but to the cemetery, to his fallen colleague who had given him a chance at life. A week later, I applied for a transfer to a station in my own town. It's smaller and pays less, but the main thing is that there's less chance of meeting that bastard again. I've been working there ever since. Pavlovich is retired and living the good life, as peacefully as possible after all this. Last week I got a telegram that they found inhumanly mutilated bodies of the locomotive crew and an abandoned diesel locomotive on that section. I'm never going back there.